Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Denim Woodsman. Something is in the woods watching me. I thought I would post this here, maybe someone on here has an idea of what it is. Over the past couple of weeks I have noticed something strange going on in the woods of my family-owned land. More specifically, something has been watching me. I don't know what it is, but I am already sure it is not human or an animal. I hear it almost every night, and I have seen it twice. Both times when I saw it, it would walk into the forest and just watch me. It's always at night, go figure, when I see or hear it, and because of it being dark I could not make out a whole lot. It was tall, 12 feet or more, and thin. It almost looked like Slender Man, but without the tentacle arms. The only other thing about it is a pattern I noticed. When it's close I get the feeling that I need to run. I'm sure when I said it looked like Slender Man you immediately thought I'm making this up, but at least give me the benefit of the doubt. For now I'm just gonna call it Slender. I don't know if this is related to it, but a couple years ago I started seeing a woman in white on the property. It was not often that I saw her, and most of the time she was far away. The last time I saw her was long before Slender started showing up. A little while ago, maybe a month and a half, I was walking home from work. I get off work late at night, and I thought I could hear a couple people following me up the road. I couldn't see anyone, but this might be when Slender first showed up. From then on, when I was walking home, I would always feel like Slender was out there watching me. The first time I saw Slender, I was walking home and I thought I saw movement up ahead. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it ahead. There was some very tall thing ahead of me, and when I shined the light in its direction it just walked into the woods and watched me. The second time was about a week later. I was walking home and heard something behind me. I turned around and pulled out my flashlight to see what it was, and Slender was standing in the middle of the road. When I shined the flashlight on him, he walked into the woods and just watched me like he did before. Me and one of my co-workers have a lot of interest in the paranormal and supernatural creatures. No, not the TV show. I've talked with him about it, and he isn't sure what it is. Something he did tell me is a lot of these creatures will leave you alone if you show it you can defend yourself, show it you're more of a threat than it's worth. I have not seen him since, but I hear him regularly. Whenever he is around I feel threatened, and based on patterns I can tell if he is close or far. If he is close I get the feeling that I need to run, but if he is farther away I get the feeling that I need to hunt him down and attack. I sometimes go to Walmart after work. There is one about a mile from where I live, and I've started carrying a pistol, legally, when I go so that if he were to attack I could defend myself a lot better. I went to Walmart last night to get batteries and something to eat, and while I was eating I was getting an uneasy feeling that something was outside and it had hostile intentions. I kept the thought in mind and planned to go outside if I still felt that way. Some time passes and I still feel a little uneasy, so I gear up to the point where you might assume I was preparing for a firefight. I was carrying an AR-15, Glock 19, a large fixed blade knife, and over 150 rounds of ammunition. If Slender wanted a fight, I was gonna give it one. I kept two things in mind while I was outside. First, lead FMJ, full metal jacket. Ammo probably won't do a lot of damage to a supernatural creature. Second, if it's made aware that I can defend myself it might move on. Now if I am going to be shooting at a supernatural creature I'd rather have something a little more powerful, like a full-auto Thompson submachine gun or a rocket launcher, but I can't use what I don't have. I head outside all geared up like Rambo, and walk around the house to find nothing there. I start hearing noises at the garage, so I head up there. I can hear some noises in the woods, and I get the "you need to run" feeling. I have my AR pointed into the woods, and I give it a short speech. If you have hostile intentions, you would be better off moving on. I'm carrying a lot of firepower, and everyone in my family will be coming at you with a lot of firepower. I wasn't about to walk into the woods, but if I saw it I was going to start shooting. I start thinking my message to it just pissed it off, because after I finish I hear something start growling. It was nothing like any animal I've heard. A second later, I hear something else growling from about a quarter mile away. I'm thinking to myself, well shit, there's two of them. The "you need to run" feeling I had earlier starts doubling down, so I back away from the section of forest I heard the first growl from, keeping my gun pointed in that direction the whole time. I'm walking back to the house and the "you need to run" feeling doesn't go away. My first thought is it's following me. I get back to the house and head inside. Now when I would get into the house, fear of the supernatural would go away, almost as if the house was on hallowed ground. It didn't happen that time. While I was in the house I was getting the attack feeling. I thought I heard noises outside, so I went back out. This time I did not have the rifle with me. I was hearing noises from two different directions. Both are outside the house, hiding in different spots. I walk around for a little bit, but decide it would be better to stay inside. I went back inside but didn't feel safer. In fact, as I have been typing this I have been listening to them walk around outside while getting run and attack feelings. I don't know what they are, but I don't think they are friendly. I will keep this updated as best as I can, and include a diagram of the land for reference. The diagram won't be pretty, but I'm not the best when it comes to computers. I hope someone has an idea of what these are, because I am clueless. Second story. This story was shared by u/Telegram101. The lights in the woods. If you are ever traveling in or around a forested area, and see lights outside of your vehicle, or in the distance, I'd suggest you find the fastest route out of there, for you don't want to know what these lights are. If it makes you feel better, you aren't alone in these sightings. Thousands have reported seeing a bright flash, or flickering light, somewhere deep in the woods. It's all over the United States, specifically in the Pacific Northwest, or the Appalachian Mountains. For the rest of the world, I do not know. I have seen the lights only once before, and I almost didn't live to tell the tale. My encounter was in Tennessee, I believe in the summer of 1997. I was traversing a barren highway at the dead of night, with no other cars in sight. I was on the highway at that time because I was going to visit family down south. I was beginning to regret not stopping for the night, for my eyes were getting heavy, and I was growing ever so tired as the time passed on. It got so bad, that I pulled off into a little gravel shoulder on the side of the highway. Before I dozed off, I noted the time on the dashboard of my car. It read 11:58 p.m. I promptly fell asleep. I awoke to something, though I couldn't figure it out then. I looked again at the time on the dashboard. 4:03 in the morning. I had been asleep for about 4 hours. I focused my dreary gaze on the highway in front of me, and then I saw it. A flash. Just up on the horizon, in the woods. I thought I was dreaming at first. Then, it happened again. This time, a little closer to the road. I didn't know what to think, other than that whatever that was, it was supernatural. Another flash happened, this time at the foot of the tree line, about 150 or so yards away from my idle car. It was getting closer. I began to hear cracking in the trees, as if a not-present wind was swaying them. I was scared. Scared to the point where I wanted to hide in my car, and pray to the Lord that whatever it was would leave me be. Another flash, this time engulfing the road ahead of me, and with that, I lost it. I jammed my keys into the ignition, and my car roared to life. I put the gear in the reverse, and floored it. I whipped around in my car, and put the gear back into drive. I looked in the rear view mirror, just as the next flash occurred. I swear, there was some ungodly thing running toward my car, illuminated by the paranormal light. I screamed, and gunned it down the highway. The engine under the hood squealed, as I stomped the gas pedal into the floor. That thing was gaining on my car, at speeds too great to be possible for any humanoid. I was still a good 300 feet ahead of it, and I was by now topping 90 miles an hour. In hindsight, the thing was probably running at around 105 miles per hour. I focused on the rear view mirror, and I got a better look at the beast. It was tall, maybe around 14 feet tall. Its skin was a mesh of bone, rotting flesh, and who knows what else. Its hands, or rather claws, had daggers hanging off its fingers, sharp enough to cut metal in half no problem. Its face was the most terrifying aspect of it. Its jaw was unhinged, almost like a snake. Its teeth were bent, and crooked, stained with mud, and bits of various material. And its eyes. They were massive. They glowed a crimson red, and seemed to penetrate your very soul. I about threw up at the sight of the beast. At just how impossible this thing was. I was beginning to realize I will die in these hills. I glanced at the speedometer, and seeing the needle to be hovering over the 110 miles per hour mark. Another flash, and I saw the thing too close for comfort behind me. I was about 50 feet ahead of it, but that gap was closing fast. I flew over a hill, and I saw a light in the distance. I suddenly knew where I was. I was nearing the end of the woods, and approaching the nearby town next to it. I thanked God I had a shot at survival, and began blaring my horn, trying to alert anyone who would be up at this hour. I heard a roar, and my car lurched forwards. The thing was right behind my car, and was trying to topple it. My car was reaching 120 miles per hour, which was the most it could offer. The lights were growing bigger in the distance, and I guessed it was about 100 yards more before I would be out of those woods. The creature again lifted the rear end of my car, and I was lifted into the air. It had caught me, and I was so close to freedom. I dove over the center console, and opened the glove compartment. I pulled out the pistol that was inside, and loaded a magazine into the gun. I bought it for safety reasons, and this was the perfect time to utilize it. I chambered around, and stuck my arm out the window of my car. I realized I was face to face with the thing, and I aimed the gun at its eyes. I squeezed the trigger, and the thing roared in obvious pain. I shot it at least 5 times, and even after it dropped me onto the pavement below, I fired at it until the gun was empty of bullets. It darted back into the woods. I turned and sprinted the remainder of the way into town. The police had heeded the gunshots, and found me wandering the streets, covered in the thing's blood. I was taken into the police department, and told them my story. Nobody believed me. Until the next day. I led them back to the site of my car, or what was left of it. Nobody could explain the wreckage. They couldn't explain the blood trailing off into the woods. And they couldn't explain the claw marks and handprints too large for a human's on the back of my car. I believe the thing came from the flashes in the woods. And if you ever see one, turn around, and floor it back out of the woods, before you end up like me. Third story. This story was shared by you/Kronos_corner. The Wendigo. You and a group of 4 of your friends are huddled around a tiny campfire, the bitter cold cutting through you like a knife. You can see your breath every time you exhale, and the cold air hurts your lungs each time you draw in a breath. Watching the fire dance, you can't help but remember the park ranger's last words to you. Telling you that not to go up the mountain today, a storm was rolling in, but that if you did to be back before nightfall or you'll be stuck up there until spring. You laughed it off and headed up the mountain, but thanks to the expert navigators, directions you and your group get off the beaten path and quickly become lost. Nightfall came just as quickly as the snow did, and everyone deciding to wait out the storm. Your group picks out a spot and start building a fire, hoping that help will come quickly. You realize the meager rations you're brought for a weekend hiking trip will only last you until the end of the week if you are careful. The snow flurries in, the wind ripping through your coat. You spend the time huddled together and try to keep the fire going. You shiver through your first night as the waiting turns from hours to days, then to a week. You check your bag and realize that your rations have been exhausted. You and your friends try hunting for food, but you catch nothing. You're not exactly the hunting type, after all, you're from the suburbs. The most hunting you've done is sneak killing zombies on Xbox. Besides, your small pocket knives and hatchet can't take out big game, and you don't know how to set traps for small game. Your body is screaming for nutrients. Your group hasn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. You're not sure, the days have been blending together. The bitter cold continues to cut through you, you haven't felt warm in weeks. Your clothes have begun to hang off your emaciated frame, allowing the wind to wrap around your skin. Then suddenly, one of your friends stumbles and falls to the ground. You quickly rush over to see what's the matter. You shake him, check his pulse, and try CPR, but to no avail. Your friend has succumbed to hunger and the elements. You suggest that we give him a proper burial, but one in your party has a different idea. A taboo and macabre idea. An idea so dark that it takes you a moment to realize what he suggested. That you eat him. You put up a fight. People don't eat people. What would we tell the authorities? His family. But the growling of your stomach says otherwise. You protest again, but one of your friends has already gone off to find firewood. You watch as another begins undressing him and using a hatchet to cleave off his limbs. You're handed a cup of thick, red liquid. Steam flow upward as the hot blood contacts the cold air. The fire roars and your dead friend's leg is now roasting. The smell is something familiar, like sizzling pork. The next thing you know, you're looking down at a steaming piece of cooked meat. You stare at the hunk of meat, disgusted at the thought of eating it. You went to school with him, his kids are friends with yours. Before you can think about what you're doing, your body takes control, and you feel your teeth have sunk into flesh. The warmth of the meat radiates throughout your body. Your stomach screams for more. You take a drink of the blood. So warm, slightly metallic, but satisfying. You devour your meal and go back for more until the four of you have picked the bones clean. Each one of you takes an article of clothing and settles in for the night, resting assured that you have the strength to wait for help. That night, you toss and turn. Visions of your friend dances in your mind, something is chasing him. You see the warmth of his breath rapidly inhaling and exhaling as a large pale figure gives chase behind him. The pale figure pounces on his back and rips into him. Crimson blood flows on the porcelain white snow. You run toward the figure, trying to help your friend. The pale figure turns its head slowly toward you and lets out a blood-curdling scream. You freeze in place as it turns its body and runs toward you. It pounces on you. You try to fight it off. It pins your head to the ground, and right before it goes in for the kill, it looks you in the eyes. The face is familiar, a face you've seen many times. Because it's your face. The shock wakes you in a cold sweat and you sit up from a dead sleep. The warm morning light hitting your cold body, the realization of what you have done settles on you. The four of you create a story in which your friend walked off to get help and you haven't seen him since. You look at your hands, they are pale and gaunt. They look a pasty pale white, almost waxy looking. Is this from the cold? Did they look like this before? You ask yourself, but your brain is in a fog. The only thought in your mind is hunger. Your stomach growling and gnawing, feeling every pang wash over you. You need to eat. The growling of your stomach permeates your mind, the only thing on your mind. You want more food, more flesh. You look around your camp, looking at your friends intently. Your head pounding and stomach screaming for more. You stare at them like a predator stares down its prey. Focused, determined, hungry. After what feels like an eternity, you spring into action. You grab a hatchet, lifting it over your head and dropping it into the skull of your nearest friend. Blood spurts around you and the sound wet bones snapping echoes in the air. You remove the axe and plunge a pale hand deep into the cavity, pulling out bits of brain. Your cold hand steaming in the bitter frozen air. Devouring what's in your hand, you reach for a second helping, the feeling as it slides down your throat throws you into ecstasy. Blood flowing over your cheeks and down your neck. You laugh and reach for more. The other two scramble to their feet and begin to run. You quickly twist your neck in their direction. Their muscles are far too tired to attempt an escape. You twist your body in an ungodly position, you hear bones cracking as your body begins to contort. As the pair are running, one falls to the ground. You run after, pouncing on their back and snapping their neck. You look around for your last friend and find them running through the forest. You look up and let out a blood-curdling scream. You bound after him, running more like a dog than a person. You knock him to the ground. He rolls over onto his back, waving his arms to try and protect himself. You place a hand on his head. Your fingernails now long and black, pinning him to the ground. Your other hand pins down an arm. You lunge toward his exposed neck, ripping out a chunk of throat. You gulp it down, that feeling of ecstasy returning. You begin dragging him back to the makeshift campsite. Months pass and the snow begins to melt. Spring has finally arrived. Ripping a chunk of meat from a deer carcass, your head snaps from side to side. You hear the familiar sounds of human voices. You slink out of your cave and take refuge in a large bush just off the hiking path. A couple have made their way up the mountain and stumbled upon your campsite. One of them notices something moving in the bushes. A woman nudges her husband. "Look, honey, a deer. I think it's a buck," as she points at the antlers. The woman brings her phone up to take a picture on her phone. She's about to take the picture when she notices a pair of red eyes peer back at her. The husband grabs her shoulder to try and pull her back, but it's too late. You lunge at them, your deerskin cloak flapping in the wind. You knock the man to the ground, pinning his arms and legs. Your stomach growling and your head pounding, blood boiling. You rip a chuck out of his chest, the blood flowing out and mixing with the dirt on the ground. The wife tries to run, but you grab her by the hair and smash her face into a nearby tree. You collect your bounty. A trail of blood follows you as you take your bounty back to your dark, musty cave. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Worcester_ST. Something lives in the woods in Washington State, pictures included. I'd been going to college here in Washington State for 2 full semesters before I finally decided to join a fraternity. I'm not a party animal or anything, but the stories I'd heard about a particular fraternity's parties were enough to convince me that I had to do whatever it took to join it. Initiation week was exactly what you'd expect. They made us stay up for several nights in a row, eat some raw sardines, stuff like that. The crowning moment of initiation was that each initiate had to spend a night in the so-called murder forest, just outside the city. This forest is famous in our area for being haunted. Apparently several serial killer victims were found there, and on top of that people hear weird sounds sometimes. Still, lots of places have local legends, and I figured that the stories had been exaggerated to enhance our hazing experience. So the 6 other initiates and I hopped into vans and were driven to the edge of the forest. One of the older members told us that we should walk for about an hour along a path and that we'd find a campsite where we could spend the night. Each of us was carrying a backpack with a sleeping bag and tarp to lay on. I had been walking with the other guys in the group for 45 minutes. An idea crossed my mind. The rules we'd been given said we had to spend the night in the forest, not that we had to spend it in a particular area. They wanted us at that campsite so they could come in during the night and mess with us, I had no doubt. So I decided to set off into the woods by myself to avoid the hassle that sleeping in the designated campsite would bring. I congratulated myself on my smarts, thinking I had avoided any trouble. I was wrong. I walked for another 15 minutes or so by myself, lighting my way with a flashlight that I found a nice secluded spot with a clearing. I looked around and saw it was completely empty, so I set up my tarp and laid out my sleeping bag. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets, birds, and wind. I lay down in my sleeping bag feeling satisfied and flipped off the light. The forest fell silent. I don't mean to say that the wind lulled, or that there was a momentary lapse in crickets. I mean that everything that could make a sound stopped making noise all at once. It was so sudden and so complete that I thought I had gone deaf. I pulled my hand up to my ears, but when I rubbed my fingers together the soft rustling sounded out like normal. I looked around in the pitch darkness, but a thick layer of clouds made the night nearly absolutely dark. I was fumbling for my flashlight when I felt it. A warm humid breath spread across the back of my neck, like a person was standing 6 inches behind me blowing slowly. It stood in stark contrast to the chilly early spring air I had been feeling up till then. My hand found the flashlight and I spun it around, illuminating the clearing behind me, revealing nothing but grass and trees. The instant my light turned on, the sound returned to the forest, crickets and cicadas chirping away softly. I started to stand up to leave, but stopped myself. I had to have been psyching myself out. All the stories from the frat must have just been getting to my head. I couldn't explain the silence, but I resolved to stay the night. I laid back down with the light and finally turned it back off. I half expected the forest sound to go with it, but thankfully the crickets and wind stayed constant. I laid in the darkness for a while, trying to relax my heart rate enough to fall asleep. After what must have been half an hour, I finally drifted off. I don't know how much time passed, but I was woken up by a new sound. It was the sound of rhythmic heavy breathing, occasionally broken up by mumbling. The sound was coming from in front of my sleeping bag and high above me, probably some 30 feet away. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I took a picture with the flash to light up the clearing and saw a figure in the trees staring down at me. It was a woman wearing a long white dress. She had long black hair that covered her face. And her face. It looked like the skin had worn through in places. She was staring down at me. The image from the flash was burned into my mind. I kicked out of my sleeping bag and started running away through the forest in my bare feet. I couldn't hear motion behind me, but I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest where I got cell service. I grilled the members of the fraternity after I got back, but they each swore that they had nothing to do with it. I had been right about them scaring the other members of the group, but they had just used air horns and guns with blanks to scare them while they slept. I guess it's possible that they were behind it all, but I can't see how they could have made the forest silent or breathed on the back of my neck when not even the other initiates knew where I was. And that woman was not something fraternity members could have created. 5th story. The Woods of Kentucky. I just got back from a camping trip on my family's land out in western Kentucky, and I will probably never go back after something stalked us for 2 nights and ultimately made us tear through the dense woods in a panic that cannot be understood until you have been hunted by something that you know is far beyond your comprehension. Something that ancient medicine men and old wives whisper about, throwing glances over aged shoulders to peer into the darkness while leaning forward into the protection of the light of the fire. There were 6 of us out this weekend. Myself and my wife, our super tactical friend Matt, our heavyweight tank of a man friend Sam, my not really a fan of the outdoors friend Jeremy, and his outdoor-loving girlfriend Chelsea. For some background, Matt and I are gun nuts, so we were both carrying pistols, even though there isn't really anything in the woods of Kentucky that we need them for. I also had my AR-15 and Matt brought his October 22nd. We arrived at the property at 8 p.m., just as it became pitch black, so we had to make camp in the dark. Not a big deal, just throw on a headlamp and get to setting up camp, starting with the fire. The campsite was a cleared out area, with some trees on the edges, then it gets into the denser woods. Since we had our hammocks, my wife and I had to set up farther away from the fire, which was in the center of the clearing. It was unnerving to see the shadows of our friends, cast by the roaring fire, dance against the trees while we set up our hammocks. We set them up quickly, but due to the general creepiness of the situation, I didn't notice my wife occasionally pausing to look back into the woods and watching for the movement that she later told me she caught out of the corner of her eye. After setting up our camp, I realized that I had left my jacket back in my car, and Matt wanted to go check out a pond nearby, so we decided we would head out together and hit both the cars and the pond. I grabbed my AR and Matt grabbed his October 22nd to go play Mall Ninja in the woods on the way. We handed Sam a radio and made sure we were on the same frequency and headed out. Started out very tactical, but after we got a good distance into the woods, the cars and pond were both in a clearing through about 300 yards of woods, we both were getting a little nervous. I don't think we realized just how dark it was out there. We stopped bounding and covering each other from imagined Chinese paratroopers, and started walking together, rifles down, making as little noise as possible. At first we didn't really know why, but then we stopped and listened. Nothing, absolutely no sounds, no wind, no bugs, nothing. We looked at each other and even though we couldn't see each other's eyes, we knew what we were thinking. All the damn Inawoods threads on /k/ had prepared us for this moment. We knew what we had to do. I acted first, putting a palm on the back of Matt's neck, and shoved him firmly, simply being able to articulate the word, "go," under my breath. He pushed forward through the growth headlong and I did my best to keep my hand on his back and ignore the thought in the back of my mind, slowly pushing its way forward and filling my chest with terror and rising into my throat. We broke out of the woods into the clearing and made it to the cars breathing heavily. We both put our backs against my SUV and pointed our rifles into the woods, expecting something to burst after us. After 20 seconds, Matt expressed my thoughts. Something was running behind us, right? I stopped breathing when he said it, because before I had attributed it to my imagination, but a third party now confirmed that something was chasing us, and was now between us and the camp. I called Sam on the radio. "Sam, did anyone else leave camp to follow us?" "Nope, we are all here still." "Shit." I opened the car and reached in to grab my jacket and also got a flashlight while Matt continued staring at the woods, looking for the slightest sign of movement. I turned back around and turned the light on the woods. Nothing, blessed nothingness. But now we had to get back into the woods to get to camp. After 5 minutes to discussing it, we decided that it had just been our imagination, if only just to get the courage to re-enter those haunted woods. Flashlight in hand, I gripped my rifle and slogged in, Matt's hand firmly encouraging me firmly, with him watching behind us. The walk back was uneventful, but at the sight of the fire we hurried our pace even faster before re-entering the safety of the clearing. After we broke out of the woods, we broke formation and quietly agreed under our breath not to mention anything to the group. Silence, unfortunately, seemed to fail, as we were both uncharacteristically quiet. Not to mention that we had not had time to see the pond, and the group was curious about our radio call. So I told them what had happened. 3 chuckled and made fun of 4 Chan for making up ghost stories, but Chelsea listened intently. Later on she asked if any of us had read the books, Missing 411, or the Native American studies of Dr. George Marlin in his book, Rights of the American Indian. None of us had, but she told us that Missing 411 documented many strange and unexplained disappearances in America, and ROAI is an old, out-of-circulation book she found at the library when she was a kid that confirmed many things that /K/and/X/ said of the occult in the wilderness, more or less. Everyone quieted down at that, and stared into the fire. I remembered reading on /K/ that white ash kills skinwalkers, and since I was a paranoid motherfucker, I thought it might be worth it to dip my hollow points into the white ashes in the fire. Chelsea told me not to bother. It needs to be the ashes of white oak trees per Dr. Marlin. Well damn. My wife spoke up after a few minutes of silence and told us about how she thought she had seen something moving in the woods when we were setting up our hammock. At this point, we were all pretty on edge. Every once in a while we would shine lights into the forest, but never actually saw anything. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. As I lay there in the hammock, I couldn't help but listen to the rustling around our hammock and gripping my MMP tighter and wondering if that sound is really just the wind. The next day was relatively uneventful, and in the midst of the sun and clouds and changing leaves the horror of the previous night was forgotten. We went and shot guns, chopped down a tree to make seats for the campfire, and just enjoyed the cool fall air. However, instead of shooting all the ammo I brought for the trip, I decided to keep 1 full mag for my AR and my MNP. Dusk fell and we sat around the fire to cook our hot dogs. Emboldened by the sunlight and full bellies, we taunted the spreading darkness and challenged the spirit of the Wendigo, which unnerved Chelsea, and made me instantly regret my decision. Matt, however, was emboldened, and walked around camp with his rifle slung talking about how he hoped to get to be the first /K/Omando to slay a skinwalker. As the sun finally set, we built up the fire, double-checked our wood supply, and settled in for what we hoped would be a relaxing evening. About an hour after the sunset we had finished making s'mores, when the echoing howls of coyotes started. We were unconcerned, since we know that it is extremely rare for coyotes to attack people, but then the cows in a field in the opposite direction started bellowing as the wind picked up a bit, blowing piles of fallen leaves across camp and bringing into our nostrils the scent of decaying lichen and a touch of rotted meat. Jeremy nervously suggested that perhaps the coyotes had found a kill. Matt, filled with newfound confidence, wanted to go looking for them. I didn't want to go, I really didn't want to go, but I am way too loyal for that shit, so I followed him into the godforsaken woods to look for the coyotes. We moved, slowly and carefully in the direction that we had last heard the coyotes. A mixture of stealth to find the animals, and fear of the unknown. After cruising for about 50 yards, I heard Matt stumble, swear, and fall to the ground, clattering over his plate carrier. I shined my light towards him, and as I looked at what he had stumbled on, the stench or rotting meat and like a dry sewage smell wafted into my nose so that I was doubled over, ready to puke. With hands on my knees and my rifle hanging from its one-point sling, I looked up and saw that my friend had stumbled over a huge deer carcass. He was sitting on his ass just staring at the carcass wide-eyed. I immediately looked up and shouldered my rifle, looking for the coyotes, but they didn't seem to be around. I went over to help Matt up, but when I got over to him he was still staring wide-eyed at the corpse. My view of the body had been from behind, so I didn't see much, just a large deer, but from this side, I could see the horror of the animal. The animal looked both decayed and mutated. The hind legs were huge and muscular, strangely elongated, the chest and body were horribly mutilated, the intestines hanging out like its stomach had been pulled out. The head was the most decayed, I could see the skull in parts and the eyelids had been torn off, the 12-pointed antlers had moss growing all over them. But the worst part was the forelegs. They were long and slender, and ended in clawed hands. I stared at the creature for a good 5 seconds before I felt the same crushing presence that I had felt the night before, and as I looked around to identify the source, I realized that the entire forest was silent. I have never felt fear like I did in that moment, and thankfully, fight or flight screamed at me to fly. I grabbed Matt by the back of his plate carrier and pulled him to his feet and pushed him back towards camp, screaming at him to run. I looked back then, scanning around with my light when it settled on the corpse, it was moving. I reacted purely out of fear, firing several rounds from my AR that I couldn't hear anything after that due to the deafening thunder from the rifle. I dropped my flashlight in the chaos, but the light from my muzzle showed me all I needed to see to grab my friends back at camp and rush them back to the cars. The first I remember, imprinted like a photograph in my mind, is the corpse laying on its stomach, unlike on its side when we had found it. The second, is the body resting on its forearms, the head rolling limply from the shoulders. And finally, the creature standing on its hind legs, using its clawed hands to stuff its innards back into its belly. The horrible eyes staring at me with a supernatural fire, burning with hunger. I was in tears from fear when we made it to the camp. I have no idea if any of my rounds connected. I don't know what I said or what was said by the rest of my friends when we made it into camp, but I got them out of camp and into the cars. We just drove and drove until we got to a nearby gas station which was still open. I grabbed a Monster and drank it and tried to process what I had seen. There is only one thing it could have been. A true Wendigo. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/SlipAnxious137. Never hunt alone. This story comes from close to a year ago. It was a cold, dark Pennsylvania night in Appalachia that still haunts me every time I peer into the woods. I live in northeast Pennsylvania. It's a mountainous region with many urban legends and stories of cryptids. But like many scary stories, I thought these were myths rather than fact, told only with the intent to scare you. But now I understand that these stories are told as a forewarning. It was sometime in November 2022, the day was slowly coming to an end, as the sun slowly began setting behind the mountains. Me and my buddy, who I'll call M, were out in the woods getting packed up from hunting, trying to get out of the woods before the sun fully set. We were walking and talking, bullshitting the whole time, keeping an eye out for any buck we might be able to score before nightfall. When all of a sudden a doe runs out onto the trail, my buddy, thinking he's funny, charges towards the deer. But it doesn't run, it just turned its head and looked at us. Something was off about this doe though, it had human-like eyes that peered right through me. We screamed and kicked trying to startle it, and after a couple seconds it finally walked off into the woods. We started walking again, brushing off the encounter as just a deer with brain damage. We were walking for quite a while and the trail seemed longer walking out than in. It was almost like the trail had changed. Growing more and more impatient, me and P start walking quicker trying to get back to the truck, when we stopped dead cold in our tracks. Out of nowhere we heard what sounded to be a mountain lion scream, again and again, getting slightly closer each time. The silence in between each scream was louder than the scream itself. The crickets and wind has seeming vanished. But we had no reason to be scared, right? We had firearms, we would just shoot it. So with uneasy feelings we start walking, trying to make the least amount of noise as possible. Until we heard it again, right next to us. But nowhere in sight. So we start booking it. I don't look back as the truck is in sight. I get to the truck but P has the keys, so I turn around expecting him to be right behind me, but he was nowhere to be seen. Except the same ominous deer we had seen minutes prior. My heart dropped as I was alone now, and this deer, this thing was just staring at me. With that same, empty human-like gaze. But thank God P had just ran off the trail and took the longer way back. We got in the truck confused and uneasy as this was not a normal occurrence. When I told this story to a friend, he informed me of skinwalkers and the Wendigo. To this day I still believe we had encountered a skinwalker. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Mverick113. I think I had a Wendigo outside my bedroom window. Okay, so this is how it went. I was sitting in my room playing video games at like 1 a.m. and then someone started to call my name from outside my window, and it sounded just like my grandma's voice. I was 16, and living with my grandparents at my great-grandparents' home. Got our house sold out from under us, so we had to move into my great-grandma's home, and it was trying to persuade me into coming outside, and I knew it wasn't my grandma since it was talking differently than how my grandma would have tried to persuade me. It said something like this: "Hey, name here. Come outside, I have something to show you. Just come here please." But when I didn't respond, it started to tap violently on my window saying, "Why won't you come outside?" But after a while of not responding, it went away. Also note that there is a forest in our backyard with a railroad, and it was also in the middle of winter, and I didn't know what it was until I heard about the Wendigo after I searched up a bit. I'm sorry if I typed incorrectly or anything. I'm not that great at grammar when typing or writing. Also, this is a real story because now I'm actually traumatized by that experience, and I'll never go near a forest in the middle of winter for the rest of my life. Also, ATM, my house is being sold again a year later, and we are moving back to my great-grandparents' house again, but thank God it's summer. But also there are more paranormal experiences that I've had in that house, but those are stories for another time. I just wanted to share my experience with the world. Please don't bring hate to this post because I'm being honest and I really just don't want negativity here, but memes are welcome. 9th story. This story was shared by you/personal Pomelo8703. I think I had an encounter with a skinwalker or a Wendigo. I am 25, M. I live in Utah, and I'm curious if any of you have seen anything like this before. I'm pretty sure I saw a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I know it sounds strange or crazy. I don't really believe in those things, and I'm regularly skeptical when it comes to the paranormal. This happened to me when I was 17 and in high school and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door and shared this field as our backyard in a way. I have to explain that his house was built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I think there was supposed to be more houses built down this street to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically in this cul-de-sac even though no other houses were built there. This matters later in the story. I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school because I didn't have the best relationship with my parents. Every once in a while we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird gargling sound from the back porch. His room was a basement room with the window well to the back porch. It would happen maybe a couple times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would be back there. This happened for years. One night haunts my friend and I to this day. My friend was getting ready to move and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies. We decided to go on a music drive to just vibe. So we hopped in his truck with high beams and swung out of the driveway, turning them on towards the field to use the roundabout. The light illuminated this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was naked on all fours. Abnormally large, particularly its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in an unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had to be stretched onto it. But the part that still sends shivers down my spine is its face. Its jaw hung open to this gaping black maw, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us. But just as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind into the brush of the field. My friend and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other like, "Did you see that too?" We were shaken. Let's just say we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we couldn't believe what we saw. We ended up just sitting there in his basement with guns ready and waiting to hear the gargling and dragging again, but we never did. Sorry that it's not very climactic, but it's the truth. I now don't live in that town anymore. There are times when I visit there though. That empty field still feels like it's watching and waiting. Even though I can't see it, I can still feel like it's out there. 10th story. This story was shared by u/lilj20188812. It came over the fence. Okay, so hi, I was the person to post, I think it lives in the fields. This did not occur too long ago, but recent conversations with a family member have provoked further thoughts. My grandmother has told me my whole life that there used to be mountain lions or cougars in our area. It used to be swamp and dense forest. Now it's mostly fields and chunks of forest scattered about. She said her own grandmother had barely got away from a big cat by throwing her clothes off, knowing the animal would stop and smell each one and give her time to run. She said this was a safe way to escape an animal that relies on smell, especially a big cat. Anyways, my grandma's birthday party was a few days ago. We celebrated and had fun. There was barbecue, some cake. My younger cousins and I played games outside until around sunset, and my aunt yelled at us all to come in or the mosquitoes will carry you away. So we sat in a small room near the front door, which had 4 clear window panes surrounded by some colored ones. The door had some light still coming through it, which shone light on the walls. Which was kinda pretty. As we settled, we played some card games and watched YouTube. I listened to my parents talk and then waited for the conversation to get interesting. They usually did this at gatherings when the kids were not within earshot. I started to hear them hush and then silence. For a loud family, this was weird. Hearing them go dead silent kind of made my heart pick up its pace. It was like when a teacher silences a group of whispering kids. It was quick and kind of scary. I left my cousins to watch the PewDiePie video they were watching and go to the living room. To understand, imagine a rectangle standing vertically. The bottom holds a small room open across from a bathroom. These set above a bedroom. Past that is an open kitchen and dining room and living room. The kitchen on bottom and the dining room between that and the living room. Past that is another room, and to the right of the living room is another room. Sealed off. It used to be my grandfather's airplane room. He built models in there before he died. I walked past all the food, and since it was an open space, my mom and aunt watched me creep up behind everyone. This house creaked with every step, so it did not matter if they saw me sitting and staring out the large, ceiling-to-floor windows at the front yard. The front yard is to the left of the living room on our rectangle. It was just after sunset and the clouds were still somewhat lit up with a dark blue and pale purple tone. The clouds were thick because we had a storm coming. But we were not looking at that. We were staring at the weird-looking big cat sitting along the fence that it was hunched and looked thin and honestly like it was sick and decaying. But it looked like it had a long face and what looked like limbs. My two uncles and my dad quietly talked about getting the guns. We stared for a while until my cousins started calling and running out of the room as they had seen it through their window on the front door. At that time, two of my uncles got up looking for guns just in case. My aunt and my mom started to lock windows and close other rooms off from the house in case it decided to try and smash in somehow. They had the kids in the shop where my grandpa used to work. My dad, being unable to do heavy lifting and fast movement because of a prosthetic leg. So he dialed animal control phone number. With everyone looking away except for me and my grandmother. We saw it stand up like a human but hunched. The cat-like thing leaned against the fence. And then hopped over it. We thought it was outside the yard. It was in. 10 or 20 minutes before we saw it, my younger cousins and I were playing near that spot. I went to my grandmother's side and she held my hand. The cat thing wasn't a cat. After watching so many videos and reading so many articles, I think it was a Wendigo but with a different animal form. The scary part was its eyes weren't glowing any color. But they were illuminated. And they were milky gray. It was terrifying. Thankfully no one was hurt. We haven't seen it since. September 10th, okay, I've edited this so it's better to read. Thanks to the person who told me it was shit to read. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.